Hello everyone, welcome to the presentation. I hope you are doing well. This is Kirti Singh from Central University of Haryana, B.Ed program bearing roll number 200142. This video is for assignment purpose under supervision Dr. Meenakshi ma'am. So let's start. As we all are different, maybe individual differences or due to a special need, but one thing is common, we all want to live a happy and prosperous life. Education is only a way which can contribute to achieve this aim. In consideration this, UNESCO gives many policies, guidelines time to time on international level so that all the individuals around the world will receive quality education. So today I will discuss one of the policy and guidelines of the UNESCO. Policy Guidelines on Inclusive Education UNESCO 2009. So first of all, we should know about UNESCO. So UNESCO is United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. It was established on 16 November 1945. UNESCO has 195 members and 8 associative members and is governed by the General Conference and Executive Board. The General Conference is held every 2 years to adopt programs and budget for the next 2 years, while the Executive Board supervises the execution of the programs. The Secretariat, headed by the Director General, implements the decisions of these two bodies. It carries out the program both at the headquarters in the Paris and in the field. It functions through various national commissions and non-governmental organizations. The organization has more than 50 regional offices, field offices around the world, and its headquarters is located in Paris. UNESCO's mission is to contribute to the building of a culture of peace, the eradication of poverty, sustainable development, and intercultural dialogue through education, the sciences, culture, communication, and information. So, international peace is the main motive by the education culture. So, the structure of guidelines, this document has divided into two parts. The first part explains the relevance of inclusive education in today's context and describe how inclusion is linked to education for all. The second part outlines the key elements in the shift towards inclusion with a particular focus on teaching for inclusion and the role of teachers and other staff and parents communities. It also provides some simple tool for policymakers and education planners for hands-on analysis of educational plan in view of inclusive education. So first part is about inclusive education, rationale and developments. So first we will discuss the context. So in today's globalized world, with its rising disparities in income distribution, half of the world population lives on $2 a day, and over 1 billion population live on less than $1 a day. तो गरीबी के साथ साथ और भी ऐसे बहुत सारे फैक्टर्स हैं जो अलगाव यानी एक्सक्लूजन को जन्म देते हैं. While progress is being made towards the education for all and Millennium Development Goals, means MDGs, as demonstrated by the drop in number of out-of-school children and increasing enrollment rates. There is now a stronger focus on those learners who are still out of school or are hard to reach the school. So children with disabilities are still combating blatant educational exclusion. They account for 1/3 of all out of school children. They are working children, those belonging to indigenous groups, rural population and linguistic minorities, nomadic children, and those affected by HIV/AIDS are among other vulnerable groups. In all cases, एक मीन्स जेंडर बहुत ही अहम रोल प्ले करता है एजुकेशनल एक्सक्लूजन में. मीन्स गर्ल्स का एक्सक्लूजन ज़्यादा होता है. it is of crucial importance that all children and young people have access to education. However, it is equally important that they are able to take full part in school life and achieve desired outcomes from their educational experiences. Learning achievements need to be conceived more broadly as the acquisition of values, attitudes, knowledge, and skills required to meet the challenges of contemporary societies. Adults need to be provided with learning opportunities, क्योंकि अल्टीमेटली होना क्या है कि एक इंडिविजुअल को अपने कौशल और क्षमताओं के साथ अपनी सोसाइटी के वेलफेयर के लिए ही कंट्रीब्यूट करना है. So promoting inclusion means stimulating discussion, encouraging positive attitudes, and improving educational and social frameworks to cope with new demands in inclusion, educational inclusion, structure, and governance. It involves improving inputs, processes, and environment to foster learning both at the level of learner in his or her learning environment and at the system level to support the entire learning experiences. इसकी उन्नति एक प्रकार से गवर्नमेंट में भी निहित होती है कि कितनी प्रबल क्षमता और इच्छा के साथ वो समावेशी शिक्षा के लिए डिसीजंस ले रहे हैं और इंटरनेशनल लेवल पर जो पॉलिसीज है उनके साथ कोऑर्डिनेशन के साथ वर्क कर रहे हैं. सो हियर इज educational exclusion. This is an act of leaving something or someone out, मतलब किसी को वंचित करना किसी विषय वस्तु से. तो यहाँ पर एजुकेशन से किस तरह से किन बच्चों का एक्सक्लूजन होता है, कौन वंचित रह जाते हैं. तो ये सारे एग्जाम्पल्स हैं चिल्ड्रन के जो इन चीज़ों एजुकेशन से वंचित रह जाते हैं. जो भी अब्यूज चिल्ड्रन होते हैं या फिर चाइल्ड लेबर, रिफ्यूजीज, माइग्रेंट या गर्ल्स हैं, लिंग्विस्टिक माइनॉरिटी चाइल्ड है, ये सभी एजुकेशन से वंचित रह जाते हैं. तो व्हाट इज द ऑब्जेक्टिव्स एंड रैशनले ऑफ दिस डॉक्यूमेंट? To assist countries in strengthening the focus on inclusion in their strategies and plans for education. मीन्स समावेशी शिक्षा की तरफ सभी राष्ट्रों का ध्यान केंद्रित करना और उसके लिए योजनाएं बनाने में उनकी सहायता करना. To introduce the broadened concept of inclusive education, मतलब समावेशी शिक्षा के लिए एक व्यापक अवधारणा को विकसित करना सभी राष्ट्रों के लिए. To highlight the areas that need particular attention, मतलब उन क्षेत्रों पर प्रकाश डालना जिन्हें ज्यादा आवश्यकता है, जिन पर ध्यान देने की. To promote inclusive education and strengthen policy development, मतलब समावेशी शिक्षा का विस्तार करना और उसके उन्नति के लिए मजबूती के साथ नीतियों का भी विकास करना. In both developed and developing regions, there is a common challenge: how to attain high quality, equitable education for all learners. If children do not have the opportunity to develop their potential through education, their own and future families are also at risk of staying poor or of sliding into more क्रोनिक पॉवर्टी. यदि एक बच्चा शिक्षा से वंचित रहता है तो यहाँ न केवल बच्चे के जीवन पर प्रभाव होता है बल्कि उसके आने वाली जनरेशन पर भी इसका प्रभाव देखा जाता है. Subsequently, linking inclusion to broader development goals contributes to the development and reform of education systems, to poverty alleviation, and to the achievement of Millennium Development Goals. तो सभी को शिक्षित करके पॉवर्टी को खत्म किया जा सकता है और जो मिलेनियम डेवलपमेंट गोल्स हैं उनको अचीव किया जा सकता है. Inclusion in education. Inclusion in education as defined in the Solmanka statement entails recognition of the need to work towards school for all, institutions which include everybody, celebrate differences, support learning, and respond to individual needs. तो यहाँ माना जा सकता है कि जो इंक्लूसिव एजुकेशन है वो न केवल एक प्रकार के विद्यार्थियों के लिए है बल्कि सभी के लिए स्कूल जहाँ पर व्यक्तिगत भिन्नताओं को कमजोरी ना समझा जाए बल्कि किसी व्यक्ति विशेष की सभी आवश्यकताओं को पूरा किया जाए। मतलब जिस बच्चे को जिस तरह से लर्निंग कराई जा सकती है उसी तरीके से कराई जाए। तो फर्स्ट पॉइंट है इंक्लूजन। ऑल चिल्ड्रन शुड हैव द अपॉर्चुनिटी टू लर्न टुगेदर। Accessibility means educational institutions and programs must be accessible to persons with disabilities without discrimination at all. Non-discrimination. So education be accessible to all persons. जिन्हें कुछ स्पेशल नीड है उन्हें भी मेन स्ट्रीम में एजुकेशन मिलना चाहिए, उनकी जो स्पेशल नीड्स है उन्हें पूरा करते हुए। Reasonable accommodation. Necessary and appropriate modification and adjustment, not imposing undue burden to the persons with disabilities. Now, physical accessibility. School buildings should be in which areas, like ऐसे एरियाज में होनी चाहिए जो सभी के लिए अनुकूल हो। मतलब सभी प्रकार के बच्चे वहां पर जाकर पढ़ सकें। We can say it must be within safe physical reach and accessible for persons with disabilities, both in terms of school, like school तक पहुंचने में and also moving around within the school building and all the facilities. Availability. Functioning of educational institutions and programs for students with disabilities must be available in sufficient quantity within the jurisdiction of state. Now acceptability means individual differences को जिस तरह respect and ऐसे करते हैं वैसे ही स्पेशल नीड को भी ट्रीट किया जाना। मतलब जो मेन स्ट्रीम के बच्चों के साथ जिस तरह से व्यवहार किया जाता है उसी तरह का व्यवहार स्पेशल नीड स्टूडेंट्स के साथ भी किया जाना चाहिए। Now adaptability. Flexibility to meet the needs of students with disabilities, the provision of support within the general education system to facilitate education. It also requires responsiveness to the changing nature and education. For example, in the transition to inclusion, adaptability would mean recruiting special trained teachers for the students who having special needs. Now, inclusion and quality are reciprocal. How? In order to realize the right to education, the movement is increasingly concerned with linking inclusive education with quality education. While there is no single universally accepted definition of quality education, most conceptual frameworks incorporate two important components: the cognitive development of the learner on the one hand, and the role of education in promoting values and attitudes of responsible citizenship and or creative and emotional development on the other. Learning should be based on their clear understanding that learners are individuals with diverse characteristics and backgrounds, and the strategies to improve quality should therefore draw on learners' knowledge and strength. From quality perspective, the report suggests 5 dimensions to influence the teaching and learning process in order to understand, monitor, and improve the quality of education. First is learner characteristics. As no one is similar to another one, even identical twins have differences. So all learners has their own capabilities, means their unique learning style, auditory, visual, kinesthetic. Next is context. All learners have their own socio-economic bringing up, so they may perceive one thing differently. So teacher has to make sure in which context she wants to teach his learners or her learners. Now, enabling inputs. A teacher should able to make learners understood the concept with the help of required tools. Teaching and learning. Teaching learning should happen via those methods and strategies which make learning process easy and experiential, and also in a way that is useful to the learner in his survival and upbringing, his living standard. Now the outcomes. Outcome from the learning should be monitored to ensure the quality of education. These dimensions are interrelated and interdependent and need to be addressed in an integrated manner. Now, inclusion and cost effectiveness. हमारा नेशनल बजट भी लिमिटेड ही है और पेरेंट्स के लिए एजुकेशन की डायरेक्ट एंड इनडायरेक्ट कॉस्ट होती है जो बहुत ज़्यादा हो जाती है, तो पेरेंट्स भी कई बार क्या होता है प्रायोरिटाइज करने लगते हैं कि बच्चे को काम पर भेजा जाए या फिर उसे एजुकेशन के मतलब एजुकेशन पर खर्चा किया जाए, तो देयर इज अ रिस्क therefore that inclusive education is considered too costly for government and even for parents, so it can be achieved through developing more cost effective education system. Financial resources aimed at students who repeat could be better spent on improving the quality of education for all, especially if we consider the low impact of repetition on the level of students' outcome and its negative effect on students' self-esteem. It can be done via inclusion of multi-grade, multi-age, and multi-ability classrooms, initial literacy in mother tongue, training of trainer models for professional development of teachers, linking students in pre-service teacher training with schools, peer teaching, and converting special schools into resource centers that provide expertise and support to clusters of regular schools. The long-term social and financial cost of educational failure are therefore no doubt high, since those without the skills to participate socially and economically generate higher cost for health, income support, child welfare, and social security systems where they exist. So it creates the production loss of GDP by not including persons with disabilities in mainstream. Education is often said to be play a key role in determining how one spends one's adult life. A higher level of education often translates into higher earning, better health, and longer life. Now we have reached at part 2, moving policy forward. The success of creating inclusive education as a key to establishing inclusive societies. Active collaboration between policymakers, education personnel, and other stakeholders, including the active involvement of members of local communities such as political and religious leaders, local education officials, and the media. So, the first point is situation analysis. Carrying out a situation analysis on the scope of issue, available resources, and their utilization in support of inclusion and inclusive education. Mobilizing opinion means shifting in thoughts for the right to education for everybody. Consensus, building agreement around the concepts of inclusive and quality education. Legalization, reforming legalization to support inclusive education in line with international conventions, declarations, and recommendations. Supporting local capacity building. This is very crucial to promote development towards inclusive education. Measurement. Developing ways to measure The impact of inclusive and quality education. Mechanisms to identify children. There should be development of school and community-based mechanisms to identify children not in school and find ways to help them enter school and also remain there to learn. Training to teachers. Uh, it is for helping teachers to understand their role in education and that inclusion of diversity in the classroom is an opportunity, not a problem at all. Now, developing inclusive education system. So, learning begins before children get to school, and therefore, ECCE is particularly important as an instrument to build inclusive societies. Early childhood care and education is more than preparation for primary school. It aims at the holistic development of a child's social, emotional, cognitive, and physical needs in order to build a solid and broad foundation for lifelong learning and well being. ECCE has the possibility to nurture caring, capable, and responsible future citizens. Looking at the education through inclusive education implies a shift from seeing the child as a problem to seeing the education system as a problem. I mean, we can change the system, not the child. Education through the inclusion lenses. The education system has the fully responsibility to ensure the right to education. It is the responsibility of education system that every child, either gifted or special need, uh, it it is equipped and ready to handle diversity through flexible teaching and learning methods adapted to different needs and learning styles. Reorienting teacher education means giving training to the teachers who teach the special needs education uh, children. Flexible curriculum responsive to diverse needs and not overloaded with academic content. Welcoming of diversity. Involvement of the parents and the community in students' education. Early identification and remediation of children at risk of failure. Like a student is having low hearing capacity, teacher has to identify and help him to fulfilling his special need. Flexible teaching methods with innovative approaches to teaching aids and equipment as well as the use of ICTs. It could also encompass the provision of instructional materials in alternative formats such as braille or plain language or easy to read formats. Curricula and teaching methods must be provided in the most appropriate languages and modes and means of communication for the individual students. This might include, for example, teaching in sign language for students who are deaf or providing educational materials in braille or audio formats for students who are blind. Responsible, sorry, responsive child-friendly environment. There also a paradigm shift from teacher or content center to learner centered. It not only consider learner content related issues but also social emotional issues. Professional environment working deliberately and actively to promote inclusion for all. Inclusive education cannot be achieved in a night. There is need of lots of work in this direction, from spreading awareness to bringing all children in educational setting and giving them quality education. Now, challenges for policy makers. First of all, attitudinal changes and policy development. The term inclusive education needs to be further clarified and adopted by educators, governmental and non-governmental organizations, policymakers, and social actors. Long-term sustainable policies of economic and social development need to be take inclusive education into account. An integral, multi-sectoral and collaborative approach is needed to guarantee the right to education. Regional and national dialogues are needed to ensure public understanding, awareness, and support of policies. Ensuring inclusion through early childhood care and education. Early childhood interventions should be seen as a sustainable way to guarantee the right to education for all the children from the start. Inclusive curriculum. Comprehensive or cohesive transition and articulation of the curriculum between early childhood, primary, and secondary education are key factors in preventing dropouts from level to level and ensuring retention. Curricular changes are necessary in order to support flexible learning and assessment. Opportunities for informal and non-formal education should be developed in the curriculum. A highly academic, heavily overloaded curriculum is counterproductive to inclusive education. Multiple stakeholders should be encouraged to participate in curriculum design. Teachers and teacher education. Teacher education programs, both pre-service and in-service, should be reoriented and aligned to inclusive education approaches in order to give teachers the pedagogical capacities necessary to make diversity work in the classroom and in line with reinformed curricula. Training of all educational professionals, including members of the community, are essential to supporting an inclusive school. The creation of incentives, renewing teachers' social status, and improving their living conditions are necessary preconditions to professionalizing the role of teacher, uh, providing them better living quarters, providing home leaves, increasing respect for their work, etc. Resources and legalization. National legalization should be changed and revised to incorporate notions of inclusive education. International conventions should be signed and ratified and reflected in national legalization. Implementation of policies and laws should be promoted and enforced. Budgetary allocations for inclusive education should be equitable, transparent, accountable, and efficient. Now, attitudinal change as the precursor to effective policy development. First is people's attitudes and values. Inclusion often requires a shift in people's attitudes and values. Such changes takes time and involve significant reassessment of conceptions and role behavior. It generally phenomenon when we encounter with a person with special need, हम कुछ समय के लिए उन्हें देखते हैं और खुद से ही एज्यूम करना शुरू कर देते हैं कि he may not be able to do this and that in just seconds only. So it this kind of behavior should not be applicable. Tolerance and understanding. Awareness rising should involve both better understanding of inclusive education and that societies become more tolerant and understanding so that acceptance for diversity can take place. Curriculum and assessment. National policies on inclusion, local support systems, and appropriate forms of curriculum and assessment are important to create the necessary context for the development of inclusion. Assessment also should base on the ability of learner. If a student is not able to speak due to specialty, then viva or oral examination cannot be imposed on him to assess his learning. Specific competencies. Educational institutions should not see themselves as the only experts on education. Expertise need not only always be available in every school, but it is important to secure access to specific competencies when needed. Resource centers. The gradual transition of special schools into resource centers with outreach service to support the regular school system and offer guidance to families in their efforts to support their children. Active role of the educational stakeholders with willingness to welcome diversity. Teachers, other educators, non-teaching support staff, parents, communities, school authorities, curriculum developers, and educational planners, the private sector, and the training institutions are all among the actors that can serve as a valuable resource in support of inclusion. Teachers, parents, and communities are more than just a valuable resource, they are the key to supporting all aspects of the inclusion process. This is based on a willingness to accept and welcome diversity and to take an active role in the lives of students both in and out of school. Now, creating an inclusive curriculum. An inclusive curriculum takes gender, cultural identity, and language background into consideration. It involves breaking negative stereotypes not only in textbooks but also and more importantly in teachers' attitudes and expectations. Multilingual approaches in education in which language is recognized as an integral part of a student's cultural identity can act as a source of inclusion. Furthermore, mother tongue instruction in the initial years of a school has a positive impact on learning outcomes. General or common goals. An inclusive approach to curriculum policy has built-in flexibility and can be adjusted to different needs so that everyone benefits from a commonly acceptable basic level of quality education. Accessibility and flexible curriculum. Textbooks and learning materials can serve as the key to creating schools for all. Many curricula expect all pupils to learn the same things at the same time and by the same means and methods. But pupils are different and have different abilities and needs. इसलिए महत्वपूर्ण हो जाता है कि करिकुलम फ्लेक्सिबल हो जिससे स्टूडेंट की नीड एबिलिटी और लर्निंग स्टाइल के अकॉर्डिंग मॉडिफाई किया जा सके. Alternate framework for imparting learning in different contexts be analyzed and better understood. The social composition of schools and classrooms is changing with more learners entering school. Diverse classrooms are the reality in most places. Greater attention is also needed to investigate unique context and settings. Schools that promote creative and active learning and inclusion provide multicultural setting and function in refugee and emergency situations. Now, teachers and the learning environment. Schools should provide children with the knowledge and skills necessary to remain healthy and to protect themselves from the risk of exploitation. Activities that promote this include ensuring life skills, education based on hygiene, alternative forms of discipline, and investment in sanitation facilities in schools and communities. Teachers need to be educated in alignment with inclusive education expectations. The way teachers teach is of critical importance in any reform design to improve inclusion. टीचर्स को मेक श्योर करना चाहिए कि जो कुछ वो स्टूडेंट्स को सिखा रहे हैं स्टूडेंट उसे सीख पा रहे हैं एंड दूसरा ये भी कि टीचर्स को समझना चाहिए कि जो कंटेंट वो बच्चों को पढ़ाने जा रहे हैं वो बच्चों के लिए कितना रिलेवेंट है. Methods and strategies. Teachers as well as school leaders must be encouraged to discuss learning and teaching as well as methods and possibilities of development. They must be given a chance to reflect together on their practice and to influence the methods and strategies used in their classes and schools. A child-centered curriculum is characterized by a move away from rote learning and towards greater emphasis on hands-on experience-based active and cooperative learning. Guiding principle. Teacher practices and attitudes towards girls, slow learners, children with special needs, or those from diverse backgrounds, cognitive, ethnic, and socio-economic. Teachers' positive attitudes toward inclusion depend strongly on their experience with learners who are perceived as challenging. The guiding principle has implications for teachers' attitudes and performance. Teachers and non-teaching support staff need to be trained. Teachers and other educators and non-teaching support staff need to be trained and ready to assist children, youth and adults in their development and learning processes on daily basis. It must be noted that all specific knowledge and competence cannot be given to the same individual. Several specializations are needed to cooperate with support ordinary school staff. Focus on creating an optimum learning environment. इसमें वो सभी एक्टिविटीज आ जाएंगी जिससे स्टूडेंट्स की इफेक्टिव लर्निंग हो not only for higher grades but for those students also who just started schooling to ensure a solid foundation in literacy and numeracy. Improvement of classroom management and using language that is adapted to a child's level of understanding, including initial literacy in mother tongue. Now, supporting the policy cycle. पॉलिसी गाइडलाइंस के माध्यम से यूनेस्को ने सजेस्टेड कुछ एक्शंस दिए हैं जिससे एंटायर एजुकेशन सिस्टम में कोऑपरेशन बना रहे. First is integration into quality school and other kinds of education and training programs. This must be reflected in the willingness of government to undertake in-depth analysis of the size and character of the out of school children and ensure their inclusion. Next is government commitment. समावेशी शिक्षा और समाज तभी एग्जिस्टेंस में आ सकते हैं जब गवर्नमेंट इसमें आने वाले हर्डल्स को आइडेंटिफाई करे और इन इश्यूज को सॉल्व करने के लिए तत्पर रहे हमेशा. National policy planning and implementation should be reflected in the comparative allocation in national budgets and in request for development assistance from international partners and the private sector. Assessment approaches that promote our development towards inclusion. All pupils should be entitled to be involved in all assessment procedures as long as they are relevant and adapted to accommodate their needs. Now, coming to the annex part means supporting systems for inclusive education. First is EFA, means education for all goals. First is expanding and improving comprehensive early childhood care and education. जो बच्चे vulnerable हैं या फिर disadvantaged कैटेगरी से हैं उनके लिए अर्ली चाइल्डहुड केयर एंड एजुकेशन का प्रावधान करना. Access to and complete free and compulsory quality education. It is for particularly girls, children in difficult circumstances and those belonging to ethnic minorities have access to and complete free and compulsory primary education for good quality. Access to appropriate learning and life skills programs means ensuring that the learning needs of all young people and adults are met through equitable access to appropriate learning and life skill program. Improvement in levels of literacy, especially for women, and equitable access to basic and continuing education for all adults. Achieving gender equality in education, eliminating gender disparities in primary and secondary education, and achieving gender equality in education. Now, quality of education and ensuring excellence, improving all aspects of the quality of education and ensuring excellence of all so that recognized and measurable learning outcomes are achieved by all the students or pupils, especially in literacy, numeracy, and essential life skills. Now, this is second annex supporting system, Millennium Development Goals 2000 to 2015 थे. The first goal is eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, reduce by half the population living on less than $1 a day and who suffer from hunger. Second is achieve universal primary education, मतलब सभी को education का access हो. Third is promote gender equality and empower women, eliminate gender disparity in primary and secondary education. रिड्यूस चाइल्ड मोर्टेलिटी रेट, मतलब जो बच्चों की डेथ हो जाती है 1 साल तक के बच्चों की, उसे रिड्यूस करना. टू इम्प्रूव मैटरनल हेल्थ, जो धात्री महिलाएं होती हैं उनके हेल्थ को लेकर प्रावधान. और नंबर 6 इज कम्बैट HIV, एड्स, मलेरिया एंड अदर डिसीज, मतलब इन सारी बीमारियों को जड़ से ही खत्म करना. और goal number 7 is ensure environmental sustainability, means reduce by half the proportion of people without sustainable access to safe drinking water. Goal number 8, develop a global partnership for development, more aid, more debt relief, access to essential drugs and good governance, etc. involves all these things. Now the third annex, legal frameworks in support of inclusion, ये 1948 से लेकर 2007 तक का. First is 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, means everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free at least in elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. 1960 Convention Against Discrimination in Education, means right of access to education and quality of education. 1965 International Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, means adoption of measures particularly in fields of teaching, education, culture and information to combat prejudice that lead to racial discrimination. 1979 Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It was for elimination of discrimination against women in the field of education and elimination of stereotypes concept of the roles of men and women by encouraging co-education. Now, 1989 Convention concerning indigenous and tribal peoples in independent countries means right to education that is responsive to culture and needs of indigenous peoples, elimination of prejudice, ensuring that textbooks and other educational material provide a fair, accurate, and informative uh, portrayal of the societies and cultures of these peoples. 1989 Convention on the Right of the Child. Right to free and compulsory primary schooling without any type of discrimination. Its emphasis on well-being and development and measures to support child care. 1990 International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of all Migrant Workers and Members of their Families means facilitation of teaching of mother tongue and culture for the children of migrant workers. 1999 Convention concerning the prohibition and immediate action for the elimination of the worst forms of child labor, access to free basic education and to vocational training for all children removed from the worst forms of child labor. 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of Diversity in Cultural Expressions, equal dignity and respect for all cultures, including the cultures of persons belonging to uh, different cultures or linguistic minorities. 2006 Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. No exclusion from free and compulsory primary education or from secondary education on the basis of disability, assurance of an inclusive education system at all levels and in lifelong learning. 2007 United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, recognizing the right of indigenous families and communities to retain shared responsibility for the upbringing, training, education, and well-being of their children consist with the rights of the child. Indigenous peoples having the right to establish and control their education systems and institutions, providing education in their own languages in a manner appropriate to their cultural methods of teaching and learning. Now the conclusion part. Inclusive education, the term is increasingly understood more broadly as a reform that supports and welcomes diversity amongst all learners. Its aim is to be eliminate exclusion that is a consequence of negative attitudes and a lack of response to diversity in race, economic status, social class, ethnicity, language, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and ability. Inclusive education is essential to achieve social equity and is a constituent element of lifelong learning. From a policy perspective, inclusive education means taking a holistic approach to education reform and thus changing the way the educational system tackles exclusion. These guidelines were discussed in a side event at the International Conference on Education in Geneva, November 2008, and recommendations from that meeting have been built into this final version. These are the references. Thank you everyone for your sincere listening. Thank you, ma'am.